Hey there, I'm Mike Davis. I'm the instructor of this course. I thought I'd post a really quick video. This won't take too long, but I have the opportunity here to give a little bit of background that the textbook does not. As you can tell, we started with chapters 1 and 2 in week 1. We are now in week 3, so we're doing chapters 5 and 6. And chapter 5 is about civil liability under tort law. And then chapter 6 is about criminal law. And there's a big distinction between those two areas of law that I think deserves a little bit of definition. So first, for civil law, what we have in those types of court cases, or that type of litigation, or that type of legal dispute, is a dispute between one human being and another human being. Okay? Or it could be a group of human beings and a corporation, or a person suing a company suing a person, a company suing a company. Either way, it's a dispute between private entities. Okay? Contrast that with criminal law, where you generally have a dispute between the government and a person. A person has wronged the government. Generally, in that type of situation, you have a criminal penalty. Now, the government does enforce some civil laws through regulation. What we typically consider to be criminal law are those laws enforced by the government that come with a criminal penalty. So either a fine, a term of years in a penitentiary, those types of things. That civil versus criminal law distinction is going to come up over and over and over again over the course of the book. But one thing is going to become obvious. We're only on chapter 5 right now. As we go all the way through chapter 27 or 30 in the book, you're going to find that almost all of the book covers some type of civil law, which is to say most regulation of corporations or small businesses, okay, the whole legal environment of business, is around 75% civil and around 25% criminal. There are plenty of criminal laws that you can violate as a member of a corporate board of directors or as an executive of a company, but for the most part, what you're going to be being wary of are your areas of civil liability, where you could accidentally wrong another person, another corporation, or violate some type of government enforced regulation. Okay? So, just want to be clear about that. And then chapter 5 goes on to talk about torts. What is a tort? Tort is the principle under which the law tries to make the wronged person whole again. Okay? So, the whole purpose of tort law is to acknowledge that a person can harm another person, or a person can do harm or cause damage to another person, and that the government can use its court system as a method through which you can make the victim whole again. Now, what are the methods by which this is done? Well, it can be through compensatory damages. So if I go out and I take a baseball bat to someone's car and I cause $2,000 worth of damage, then a court, after a normal adjudication process, can declare that I owe that person $2,000 in compensatory damages. Okay? Another method is punitive damages. So it goes beyond mere restitution to reward the victim for their trouble. So if I go out and I punch a person, right, I've probably violated criminal law on the one hand, but I've also wronged another person, right? So I would be having to pay for their medical bills if I caused them to have to go to the hospital. But just paying for their medical bills doesn't seem to make them whole again, right? If I punch a person and I cause them to bleed, or I cause them to bruise, I cause them to get $500 worth of medical expenses billed to them, then I definitely owe them the $500. But I also caused them an awful lot of trouble and some pain and suffering. So I would also owe them punitive damages, usually several times whatever the compensatory damages are. In a typical case like that in the state of Oklahoma, you'll generally get whatever the cost of the bruising or the medical bills would be, plus $2,000 to $50,000 worth of punitive damages. And then another thing that a court can do is declare injunctive relief. So one of the civil wrongs that you can do to a person under tort law is to trespass on their property. So let's say I drive my car over my neighbor's lawn because it's the quickest way to get to the highway, okay? And I make a habit of doing that. Well, the owner of the person whose lawn I keep driving across can ask me to stop, and I might not. I might be a jerk and say, okay, I'm going to keep driving across your lawn whether you like it or not. And so he can go to court and he can ask for the court to declare injunctive relief. It's not compensatory damages. Maybe I didn't cause any damage at all to his lawn. It's not punitive damages. He doesn't want money. He wants me to stop driving on his lawn. So the court can issue an injunction, which is essentially a declaration by the court that I'm not allowed to do that misconduct anymore, and that the local sheriff might enforce that. Okay. And then if I violate the injunction, that's a dispute between me and the government. So all of a sudden I've entered criminal law land. So if I violate the injunction, I could be punished with a fine, or I could be punished by having to go to jail and serving a sentence. Okay? So distinctions between civil and criminal law are very important here. The most common tort that you will hear of, especially when it comes to the legal environment of business, is the cause of action of negligence. You're going to see a lot of other stuff in your chapter that is not going to come up a lot over your career in business after you get your degree from Southeastern. Okay? Very rarely are you going to falsely imprison someone, right? Maybe if you're detaining them for shoplifting and they didn't actually shoplift, you could get a false imprisonment case, but it's going to be rare. What really comes up quite a bit is negligence. What is negligence? There's 4 elements, and it's discussed in your book, but I think it deserves some emphasis here. 4 elements are, first, that you have to have a duty. Now, we all have a duty to our fellow man, to treat them with dignity, human dignity, to not cause them harm, to warn them about dangers that are approaching, right? So we definitely have a duty. If we opened up a company, opened up a storefront, and invited people into our location, we have a duty that that location be safe from contagion. We have a duty that that location have reasonable warning signs if there's anything amiss. Part 2 is that you have to have a breach of duty. So if I have an expectation I'm supposed to keep, and I fail to keep that expectation, we've already hit parts 1 and part 2 out of the 4. So one example that you could use is if you run a trucking company, and I use the trucking company hypothetical quite a bit, that you have a duty that you will hire safe drivers. A breach of duty would be to hire someone who is knowingly a bad driver. You know that they have a reputation for bad driving, either by looking at their driving history, by interviewing them and discovering their driving history that way, or by just knowing through third parties that they get pulled over an awful lot, or that they drive drunk an awful lot. Okay? So duty, breach of duty. And then for you to have committed negligence, you have to have the last 2. The third part is causation, also known as the but-for test. So but for your negligence, would damage have happened? And that's the last one. Part 4 is damage. Damage must be caused. So let's tie them all together with the trucker hypothetical. What is your duty? To hire safe drivers. What would constitute a breach of that duty? Hiring someone who you know has a history of drunk driving. What would constitute causation and damage? That as a result of your hiring someone who has a history of drunk driving as a professional truck driver, then he turned left across traffic, cut off a car, and caused a collision. But for your hiring him negligently, that may not have happened, right? So you would be guilty in a court of law of some type of negligence. Now, I use the word guilty there, but it's sort of misleading. That implies that there would be criminal penalties. Not often in a case like this. You would be sued by the victim, somebody involved in the car crash. the company would be sued, and then you would be responsible for the actions of your employee under tort law, under civil liability. Okay? And that's judged in a different standard than criminal law. So let's talk about the two competing standards. If you're prosecuted for criminal conduct, we all know the burden because we know it from Law and Order. You have to have guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The guilt beyond a reasonable doubt standard is not the standard used for civil cases. Okay? So if we're talking about any type of tort law that appears in Chapter 5, whether it be false imprisonment, whether it be civil assault and battery, whether it be negligence, the standard is reduced from guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Instead, the standard is a preponderance of the evidence. What is a preponderance of the evidence? Essentially, the best way I can define it is 51% or 50% plus a feather, whoever I believe more. If I look at all of the evidence and it just tips towards the plaintiff being more believable than the defendant, then that's the person who wins the case, right? So people who serve on civil juries have a very, very difficult time sometimes trying to decide what happened to who and when and whose side of the story is the accurate one. Okay. Now, some quick notes on criminal law for Chapter 6, and I'll be very brief here. First, for a crime to have been committed as a corporation, a person must do some type of criminally forbidden act along with having forbidden intent or criminal negligence. Okay? Let me say that again. In order for a crime to have been committed, a person must do a forbidden act, criminally forbidden act, as well as have the mental intent to do that act or some type of criminal negligence. You have to decide for yourself whether both parts exist before you can say that a crime has been committed. Okay? Second, corporations can hold criminal liability. It's just that they're held to those responsibilities very often in a different way than an individual would be. You can't take a corporation and put it in jail, but you can criminally fine a corporation. You can have an injunction that puts that corporation out of business. But also, and more importantly to you personally, is that corporate officers, corporate board members, corporate executives who do something criminal can be held personally, criminally liable for that conduct, whether or not the reason that they did that criminal act was to enrich themselves or the company. So if you committed some type of embezzlement for the company, you still committed embezzlement. Doesn't matter whether it was for the company or for yourself. Okay, I said I'd keep this short, so I'll sign off, and good luck.